The banners are falling faster than the men who carried them.
You walk quietly for a man who wants to be heard.
I was not certain you would listen.
I always listen. I simply decide what matters.
Then decide this. What remains of Sim is not his empire.
No. What remains is what we allowed him to become.
And you think the Corps will see that?
They will see what we choose to send them.
The truth is dangerous on Desevro.
No. Silence is what made him immortal.
There are still those who would kneel to that memory.
And there are worlds that will call it a warning.
The Corps will not mourn Tioni's dead.
I am not asking them to mourn us. I am asking them to fear what divided worlds allow to rise.
You think fear can build law?
No. But fear may bring proud worlds into the same room.
And when they gather, Coruscant, Corellia, Alderaan, all pretending they do not hunger for the center?
Then let them argue before they bleed.
You speak as if words can stop conquest.
No, words alone cannot. But words bound into law may outlive every throne.
Sim had laws.
Sim had commands. There is a difference.
And if the Corps builds another throne and calls it a chamber,
then the record we send must warn them of that too.
you want me to give them our shame.
I want you to give them the price of worshipping power.
And if they ignore it?
Then one day, another name will stand where Sim stood. And another chamber will be built to remember the dead.
Representatives of the core and outer systems. Coruscant acknowledges your presence before this chamber.
Alderaan comes not to claim authority,
but to prevent another age of conquest. The Tion cluster has heard such assurances before.
And Corellia would prefer to understand precisely where those assurances end and where authority begins.
Tion remembers what happens when systems surrender vigilance in exchange for promises of order. Then perhaps vigilance is precisely why this gathering matters.
Initial constitutional proceedings are now formally recorded.
The Chamber recognizes all delegates under civic accord. No system gathered here is being asked to surrender sovereignty. Not immediately.
Corellia raises a legitimate concern, though perhaps prematurely. Premature caution did not preserve Desevro.
And who secures those routes once authority centralizes here? Coruscant seeks coordination, not dominion.
History rarely distinguishes between the two. If these systems cannot trust one another now, they will not trust one another after another war.
Cross-system sovereignty concerns formally entered into constitutional record.
The Chamber requests orderly recognition before interruption. Without a common legal structure, every route, every border, and every treaty remains vulnerable to the will of the strongest system. And with one, every route, every border, and every treaty may answer to Coruscant.
If fear of Coruscant prevents law, and fear of conquest prevents trust, then this chamber has already failed. Failure does not begin with armies. It begins when powerful worlds convince themselves that their intentions are enough.
Intentions are not the proposal. Law is.
Sim called his will law. His subjects learned the difference too late.
The Chamber will refrain from direct historical accusation.
No, let him speak. If this chamber cannot endure an old truth, it has no right to write new law.
Then perhaps the question is not whether authority should exist, but how deeply it must be restrained.
A republic cannot be born from obedience. It must be born from consent. Consent, restraint, and limits on central authority entered into preliminary record.
Yeah. Every empire in history has called itself necessary before it called itself permanent.
And every collapse born from division leaves entire systems undefended.
Desevro did not fall because authority was absent. It fell because power stopped answering to anyone.
And who decides when Coruscant itself stops answering?
This chamber was not assembled to replace fear with another form of fear.
Yet fear is the only reason half these systems are still listening. If this assembly fractures now, every system beyond these walls will fracture with it.
The Chamber will maintain recognition order. Then this Chamber must decide whether it intends to govern or merely survive discussion.
Escalation of procedural dispute formally entered into constitutional record.
You speak of law while positioning Coruscant above every system in this chamber.
And what would you propose instead? Another century of fractured territories waiting for the next warlord to unite them through blood?
We already survived that war!
And the core did not bury our dead.
Enough! You speak as though this chamber exists to decide which world deserves power.
Because power is exactly what is being negotiated here.
The Chamber will return to order immediately.
If this collapses here, then every system leaves believing war is inevitable.
Then perhaps war becomes inevitable the moment this galaxy refuses law.
Constitutional proceedings temporarily suspended pending restoration of chamber order. If this chamber cannot restrain power, then no system here will ever truly be safe.
Corellia will not kneel to a central throne.
Then perhaps the law must forbid any throne from existing.
And if one system attempts to rise above the others?
Then the law must stand above the system.
Then no world governs alone, and no world stands alone. A government restrained by its own foundation.
Not obedience.
Consent.
Then let this chamber begin drafting a law that binds worlds without enslaving them.
Preliminary constitutional framework proceedings resumed. The revisions were added exactly as the chamber requested. Limits on central authority, distributed representation, and independent system protections.
And now every core system will interpret those protections differently.
That may be the only reason they agreed to remain in the same chamber.
Bomababe want to susintu mukarata insula rakarakachata tamasokin chudawanga mopiguna wana si chokoratawa.
These records cannot be altered once transmitted beyond Coruscant.
Meiranga nanoloja tonoranga manakan ipoenshawa. Ansanaja tu estrictona tadakacha.
Then whatever is beginning here will survive, or collapse, by how those worlds choose to hear them.
Attention. All sections prepare to jump to the Alderaan system.
Power relay grid is still fluctuating. Hold the cable steady. Steady.
2 cells depleted. Swapping auxiliary reserves now.
Auxiliary power transfer acknowledged.
Unit 74, you can deliver them now. Secondary conduits are online. Bring the regulator flow down slowly.
316, report to control.
Regulator flow reduced to maintenance tolerance.
General Leader, please report to Governor Carson's office.
Coolant circulation restored, rerouting through secondary N-type.
Flow stabilized. Hull response returning to nominal.
Docking Bay 34. Slave 1 on approach for landing. Docking Bay 34. Slave 1 on approach for landing.
You're expected. The chamber has already been notified of your arrival.
We came directly from the outer relay. Has the delegation assembled?
Most of them. A service unit will escort you the rest of the way. Welcome, sir. Please follow me.
Security team, report to docking bay 6.
Your transmission stated the Chancel's office wished to discuss navigation governance beyond the core routes. That is not a small matter to bring across half the galaxy. The expansion corridors are growing faster than the agreements that govern them. Trade disputes, hyperspace toll conflicts, border claims between systems that were barely mapped a generation ago. Coruscant believes the current structure will not survive another century unchanged.
And Coruscant's answer is centralized oversights. Navigation lanes controlled from one world.
Tariffs reviewed by distant administrators who have never even crossed the Perlemian. No one is proposing occupation. We are proposing stability before the outer expansion fractures into economic warfare.
Unregulated expansion already creates instability between systems, but permanent centralized control would create fear just as quickly. There must be limits, clearly written, before any world agrees to this accord.
Corellia built its prosperity on open movement. If hyperspace authority becomes concentrated under a permanent central administration, then eventually every independent trade world becomes dependent on Coruscant. The systems joining this accord are not surrendering sovereignty. They are attempting to prevent future wars before those wars become impossible to contain. Every centralized structure begins with promises of coordination. Then the regulations arrive. Then the fleets. Then perhaps the question is no longer whether the core worlds will unite. Only what kind of union they are willing to build.
Initial framework for inter-system cooperative authority entered into record. Pending ratification by the participating worlds.
Then let this be the first agreement built by worlds that chose cooperations over fear. Alderaan welcomes you, delegate. Your world honors us with its hospitality. The Council already awaits you on the upper terrace. Then let us hope this meeting changes more than one world.
Coruscant's journey to Alderaan is never made lightly.
Nor does Alderaan grant audience without reason.
Then let us hope both worlds considered this meeting necessary.
Coruscant did not send me merely to request support. We came because the trade routes are beginning to fracture.
The outer systems still recover from the Sim conflicts.
And independent fleets already demand toll authority.
If every world enforces its own passage law, hyperspace itself becomes territory. The archive seal has been verified. Inside rests an ancient hyperspace survey core. Compact crystalline navigation architecture, containing reconstructed route harmonization proposals gathered from core systems.
These are unified corridor proposals.
Shared navigation standards.
Shared arbitration.
Shared protection.
And who commands this structure once it exists?
No throne. No dynasty. Only a union strong enough that another Sim can never rise again.
Then perhaps the question is no longer whether the core should unite, but whether the galaxy survives if it does not.
Alderaan will attend the convocation.
Then the Foundation begins here.
Chandrila has listened to the concerns carried from Coruscant, and to the caution spoken by Corellia and Alderaan alike. For too long, the worlds of the core have stood connected only by trade routes and temporary accords, while every new crisis forces us to begin again from nothing. If this convocation seeks not dominion, but shared law, shared navigation, and a common protection between systems, then Chandrila will stand among those who answer the call.
Then let Chandrila's voice stand beside those already gathering for the convocation. Not as tribute, but as trust. Then let the navigators of Duros stand among those who choose cooperation over isolation. The routes ahead will no longer belong to one world alone. Then let this be remembered as the moment the distance between worlds began to narrow.
Corellia offers routes. Duros offers charts. Alderaan and Chandrila offer legitimacy. But a union without industry, without protected transit, without fleets, will collapse before its first generation.
That is why I came to Kuat last. The worlds gathering around this accord can propose laws and routes. But only Kuat can bind those worlds together with strength durable enough to survive what comes after.
You are not asking Kuat to serve Coruscant. You are asking Kuat to help build something greater than any single core world.
A republic cannot survive on ideals alone. It requires worlds willing to carry its weight together.
Then Kuat will stand with the convocation, and we will not stand at its edge.
Then the core worlds will move forward together. For thousands of years, our world stood divided, separated by distance, by fear, by war. Empires rose, kingdoms vanished, entire civilizations disappeared into the dark between stars. Yet still, we remained alone. Today, for the first time, the core, the colonies, and the distant worlds beyond them sit together, not as conquerors, not as subjects, but as witnesses to what may become the first true union in galactic history. No world here questions the wisdom of cooperation. But history teaches us that authority, once centralized, rarely remains limited. Systems unified, trade secured, borders protected. And always, somewhere beneath those promises, power begins to accumulate. A republic must never become a throne wearing the mask of law. If we gather the authority of countless worlds into one center, then safeguards must stand stronger than ambition itself. We speak today of unity, but unity without restraint has destroyed civilizations long before our own age. This chamber must never forget that freedom surrendered willingly is rarely returned willingly. That is why Coruscant does not oppose this union. We oppose only the possibility that future generations may inherit a government powerful enough to silence the very worlds that created it. If this republic is to endure, then every system seated here must remain more than a symbol. Representation cannot exist merely for ceremony. A distant world must possess the same voice in law as the world upon which this chamber now stands. Otherwise, we do not build a republic. We build hierarchy. No sector should fear economic isolation for political disagreement. No governor should command fleets beyond civilian oversights. And no founding world, including my own, should ever stand above the laws agreed upon here. We stand at the beginning of something fragile, a structure that may survive for thousands of years, or collapse beneath the weight of its own ambition within a generation. That decision will not be made by constitutions alone. It will be made by restraint, by discipline, and by whether those who lead this union remain servants of the Republic or become masters of it. Coruscant accepts the burden of responsibility, but responsibility must never become dominion.
Then answer this plainly, Coruscant. When this Republic commands fleets, regulates trade routes, and controls navigation law, what prevents future generations from calling that authority permanent?
Nothing.
Then you ask us to trust the restraint of rulers not yet born. History offers little comfort in that regard.
No constitution can eliminate ambition. No chamber can guarantee wisdom. But divided systems guarantee something else entirely. Isolation, fragmentation, and vulnerability.
Corellia will not surrender independent authority merely because fear makes unity attractive. We built our roots long before this convocation assembled. And we will not place them beneath destined oversight lightly.
Nor should you. A republic imposed through fear would already be a failure before its first law is written. The purpose of this union is not to erase sovereign worlds. It is to ensure they survive together.
Perhaps the question before this chamber is not whether power can be abused. History has already answered that. The true question is whether worlds divided by fear can survive what lies ahead.
Alderaan does not support domination by the core. Nor do we support isolation disguised as sovereignty. If this republic is to endure, then cooperation and restraint must exist together.
Law without compassion becomes control. But freedom without unity becomes chaos. This chamber cannot choose only one. Then the structure itself must prevent imbalance. Representation cannot survive on goodwill alone. No single founding system should possess unilateral authority over military deployment, trade arbitration, or navigational restriction. Voting power must remain distributed among member worlds.
Safeguards are not obstacles to unity. They are the only reason unity survives beyond the generation that creates it.
Then let us speak plainly. Unity carries a cost. Fleet construction, trade corridor protection, infrastructure stabilization, long-range defense coordination. Worlds do not remain secure because assemblies debate philosophy. They remain secure because shipyards function. Supply lines survive. And hostile forces understand the consequences of aggression. If this Republic intends to defend hyperspace routes across thousands of systems, then member worlds must accept obligations equal to the protections they demand. Because if this chamber creates laws without the strength to enforce them, then this Republic will collapse the moment the next war arrives.
Then we are agreed on the truth of this moment. A Republic built only on ideals will fail, and a Republic built only on strength will become the very thing it was created to prevent.
Corellia will accept shared law. If no world may command the routes alone.
Alderaan will accept union. If that union is bound by consent, restraint, and dignity.
Chandrila will accept the framework. If representation is written into its foundation, not granted as courtesy. Kuat will accept obligation. If protection is not promised in words alone.
Then let it be written. No single world shall rule this union. No voice shall be silenced by distance, wealth, or fear. From this day forward, let these worlds no longer gather as rivals seeking advantage, but as members of one shared republic. Not an empire, not a throne, not a dominion of the core. A republic of worlds.
Alderaan stands.
Kuat stands. Corellia stands. Chandrila stands.
Then let the galaxy remember this day, not as the moment power was claimed, but as the moment worlds chose law over fear.